Let's Get To presents Go Go Astros, a focus on H-Town hardball.
So we are back here on Go Astros. Andy and Brian are here, and we've outlined some stuff to talk about because right now there is nothing to talk about. We did get an update.
Wait a second. There was a report this week that they're going to meet in 2 weeks. So that's nothing.
It's nothing. Yeah, Jeff Bassan had a whole lot of updates, and he just sort of kept writing nothing. Gentlemen, though, how are we doing today? Are we having? Are we over the cold yet? I'm over the cold.
It is 15 degrees right now in New Jersey. So no, I'm not over the cold, and I'm not getting over the cold anytime soon, unfortunately.
When was it cold?
I'm freezing right now.
It was like 75 degrees on Sunday.
Yeah, but it was 35 degrees this morning.
I don't know. Live closer to the coast. We're a healthy 45 this morning. It'll be like 58.
Now, we did want to talk, though, Brian, a little bit about just sort of the changing landscape of the AL West, because, as we talked about in one of our episodes, a lot of teams sort of at the bottom or on the bubble made a flurry of activity while across MLB presumed contenders just didn't. What do we think about this, guys? I mean, I know, Brian, you're going to kind of lead this conversation, so take us.
Yeah, I think there's sort of two ways to look at this. One is sort of at the major league side, in which the biggest moves were made by the Rangers, who we spent a lot of time watching the Rangers as Astros fans because we keep having to play them. And I think I said this before on the podcast, but I spent like the first half of the season having playing with the Rangers thinking, like, are any of these guys going to be on the next Rangers playoff team? They've been rebuilding for 4 years and they have nothing to show for it, or close to nothing. And, they in some ways got impatient, right? Because they signed guys to 8 and 10-year contracts and have presumably their middle infield set for a while. The other team I think that's real interesting when it comes to sort of the future of the AL West, particularly looking 2-3 years down the road, is the Mariners, who have one of the better farm systems in baseball. But so far, that's produced Jared Kelenic, who had an underwhelming year, I think would be the best way to say it, in 2017, and raised doubts about whether he's a long-term player. At the same time, they seem to have the best prospect in the division, Julio Rodriguez, who's likely to come up this year and probably take over an outfield job for them. And they've got a number of pitching prospects who are, again, have some potential to improve a major league roster. They've now got Robbie Ray, who they signed this offseason to a 5-year contract to be someone to anchor their rotation for a while. Obviously, the issue with pitching prospects is you can have a pitching prospect today and you can have Forrest Whitley tomorrow, which we unfortunately know a little too well as Astros fans, or Francis Martez, right? The Astros sit at a really sort of interesting position because at one level, they're a more veteran team, right? They've got guys like Altuve, who's, approaching his he's in his 30s, Bregman, who's approaching that, guys like Gurriel and Brantley, who they're going to need to replace the next couple of years. But they actually have a really interesting core of young talent, headlined by Cal Tucker and Yordan Alvarez, who are, I think, all-star level players. And then with, 3 relatively young guys in the rotation who've already proven themselves in Fromber, Luis Garcia, and Jose Urquidy.
Right.
And, you kind of say, like, well, I think the baseline for the Astros is to be, 3 or 4 years from now, is to be a 500 team. And that's the floor, and they can do better than that. So will they get passed in the AL West in the next few years? Maybe not, which is not quite the answer I think I would have said, a year ago or 2 years ago.
Andy, what do you think about the things that Brian said?
The things that Brian said. I like the Mariners.
By the way, I was cold. I put my Astros Letterman jacket on. I have one of these.
You turn off one spreadsheet and all of a sudden Jim is wearing something different, which is weird. I'm
like the Reba McEntire of Astros podcasters.
Speaking of that, I know this is not the topic of this show, but I watched the national championship game last night. And
SEC. Am I doing it right, guys?
Absolutely, because it didn't matter. And be glad that Saban lost, so everybody's happy about that. But they did a Katy Perry video, and I don't know what I was supposed to be looking at, but I was immediately taken back by the first 2 minutes of that video. She had 9 different costumes on. Now I know what I was supposed to be looking at because, red-blooded American male, whatever.
Yeah.
But 9 different changes of clothes in 2 minutes was a lot.
That's
all that aside. I like the Mariners. I think they're probably the biggest challenger to the Astros in the current state, but I think I think one of the things that they did this offseason that's going to go unnoticed for a while is acquiring Adam Frazier. I think he solidifies their infield. He's a better defensive player than Abraham Toro. Toro is probably going to get shifted to third base, is my guess, with the retirement of Kyle Seager. And so that gives them a fairly young infield that can grow together and be together. And that's really how the Astros built their team. They have an infield that, as we heard ad nauseum through the playoffs, had played together for the last 13 decades or something like that. Most playoff appearances ever by 4 people who know each other and rode on the same bus or something like that. The rest of the division, and I don't even think the Mariners are necessarily a challenger for the division this year. I think they'll be good, but I see them as a lot like the 2016 Astros. They had an out of nowhere season in 2015, and they came back to earth a little bit in 16 because they realized that a team full of rookies needs some veteran leadership, and Colby Rasmus wasn't the guy. And I think
much to Jessica's chagrin.
I know many women in the city of Houston were disappointed.
They poured one out for Colby in the hair.
I went to a game at Yankee Stadium that was at 40 degrees, and Rasmus had the he had the ski mask going, and the hair flowing behind it, and it really was an excellent look. I recommend it to him next time he robs a bank.
But still, probably sleeveless under his jersey because Colby Rasmus. Hey, the Mariners have Kyle Lewis coming off the IL. I think he's a guy that's going to improve on what he's already done in the major leagues. Kelenic honestly got nowhere to go but up because his beginning of his major league debut was rough. Now, he did get better in the last month of the season. A couple of painful memories that I saw against the Astros where he got key hits, but he's still a guy that batted 185 this year. So he's got some things to figure out. And they've got some pieces, I think, with Julio Rodriguez, too. If he's everything they expect him to be, I think offensively, they're going to be very solid. I still think pitching's a concern with them because they've yet to show they can really develop anybody over a long term. And Robbie Ray is – I'm glad we got Verlander instead of Robbie Ray, I guess is a nice way to put that.
Yeah, the Robbie Ray deal was interesting because remember there was the rumor that the Astros were going to trade for him the year they got Greinke.
Yeah.
And then we saw what his 2020 wasn't good. He had an outer body.
Not good is generous.
Yes.
Yeah, right. And then 2021, I mean, he did win the Cy Young. Some might wonder how much sort of like cold, the sticky stuff thing might have taken him out of that competition. So it seemed, I mean, I'm glad he got his money. He deserves to get his money, but yeah.
I mean, I think he's good. I just don't think he's savior of the franchise front end of the rotation good. I think the Blue Jays made him look a lot better last year than he actually was.
Yeah, and if you put together his 2020 and 2021 season, Robbie Ray has something like a 3.6 ERA with lots of strikeouts, and he's always had lots of strikeouts, but good but not great control, good but not great walk rates. And I think that's probably what to expect, which is an upgrade on the Mariners rotation. They certainly need that. Is it worth $100 or they spend $110 million on him? We'll see. It's what the Astros are spending on Lance McCullers. It's a little bit above what the Astros are spending on Lance McCullers, but that's kind of where I sort of have Robbie Ray in my sort of mental map that he's somewhere at that level. And we've described Lance McCullers on the show a lot as ace-ish. He's not Justin Verlander. He's not Garrett Cole. He's not Max Scherzer, but he's a level down, and you need a lot of pitchers like that.
Yeah, I think Ray's in that group with Nathan Eovaldi, the guy that doesn't wow you, but he's a very solid piece of a rotation and a guy that you need to be a playoff team. So good for the Mariners, but I think we're really worried about them in 2023. And this is all assuming, of course, we have a baseball season in 2022.
Yeah, well, and I think it's worth it's worth sort of noting too that while the Mariners won 90 games this year, their run differential was that of a 78 win team. This is part of why they traded Gray, and it's like we're not actually this good,
Right.
And so that's the real baseline to think of this team coming up. If they win 85 games this year and have a run differential of a team in the mid 80s, that's an improvement for the Mariners, even though their record will go down. And this is where I agree with Andy. I think they're a real threat to win the division in 2023 and 2024. I think the biggest threat to challenge the Astros to win the division this year is the Angels, who are a very sort of different team than either the Mariners or the Rangers that we've been talking about, because they have a lot of star level players. And I assume one year they're going to get 20 WAR from a combination of having these massive stars of Mike Trout, Shohei Ohtani, and Anthony Rendon. On the other hand, they're probably more likely to get half as much from that because they all end up injured and their pitching staff falls apart every year. But one year it's going to work, right?
I mean, does it have to?
It hasn't yet.
That's the thing. Otani's a great talent and a great story. Last year was the first year he managed to make it through a full season not injured. Trout didn't make it through the full season not injured, and that's been a recurring theme for the last couple of seasons with them.
And unlike the last couple of years, Trout had this injury that seemed relatively small, like it would be a 4 to 6 week injury, and it ended up being a season ender, and that makes me more wonder about his long-term durability more than the other stuff.
It reminded me of some of the Correa stuff in the past where it was a week-to-week thing, literally, and then it ended up being much bigger.
But the bigger story with me with the Angels is always pitching. They can't develop it. They don't really know what they're doing when they acquire it. And they did make a big acquisition in Noah Syndergaard, who, if he's on his game and healthy, is going to be a huge improvement to anything they've put in the rotation in probably 3 years. Yeah. But behind him, he only pitches once every 5 days, and he's not 100% healthy all the time. They also acquired Aaron Loop, which I guess they're going to try to give him a rotation position, but not a history of performance. Michael Lorenzen, I guess, is a piece for the bullpen, but not a great one, and one who has steadily gone downhill. And they got a really light hitting shortstop to shore up their infield. So there's some holes there. I really think their ceiling is kind of, unless they catch fire and again all their stars perform to the max of their ability, they might be a 500 team this year.
They still feel like a 500 team to me. Yeah,
I mean, it's an improvement for them.
And the deal for Thor, that was just a 1 year deal, right?
Yes.
Or was it like Verlander's 1 year with the player option? Okay,
it's a straight 1 year deal. And what's interesting is they took, for a team that feels to me like they need floor rather than ceiling, they took a ceiling player. If Syndergaard comes back to what he was 4 years ago and gets healthy, hey, they've got an ace. And, again, they're adding a bunch of wins to the, bunch of WAR to their rotation. But if he's like he's been the last couple, even before he got injured, a more mid-level pitcher, or if he's like an Angels pitcher and pitches 10 starts and spends the rest of the year on the IL. So it's real curious to me that they didn't sort of prioritize a guy with a high floor, lower ceiling, like a Marcus Stroman or a Steven Matz, who seemed a much better fit for what the Angels need. Someone with people with long, in Stroman's case, a long history of health that, hey, I know, he's not going to win the Cy Young, but I definitely can run him out there for 30 starts. And good Lord, I need 30 starts from somebody.
My expectation of Syndergaard's a little bit different. I think he stays healthy, but I don't think it matters for the Angels' bottom line. And he is a piece that they will be looking to trade by July 31st. And if that's the case, it's really a matter of how well can he perform that's going to get us a couple of more pieces to continue the rebuild. But that's the cycle that the Angels are perpetually in. And they're perpetually in that cycle because they can't develop pitching in their organization. And I really don't know what, if they don't see the need for it, or they're just really, really bad at it. But it's like every variable has combined on them to just prevent them from really creating even a league average starter for going on 5 years now.
They tried a new strategy in the draft last year.
Yeah, they drafted
20 draft picks and they drafted 20 pitchers.
Yeah, 20 pitchers. But here's my problem with that, Brian, is by the time those 20 pitchers are MLB ready, the core that you mentioned, Ohtani, Trout, those guys aren't going to be there anymore. It isn't as smart a rebuild as what we saw out of Houston or the Cubs or the Cubs but the Royals, where they're always going to be chasing something. They'll get their pitchers under control out of the minors in 3 or 4 years. And now they've got to go sign bats again. I think it's a broken organization, and they need to really figure out a way to actually do a real, true, proper rebuild.
Yeah. I'll give you one more scenario in which the Angels do better. I'm a little bit more optimistic than I think either of you. That is, they have 2 young outfielders who, seem like they could be improvements. One would be Brandon Marsh, who came up last year and is a good defensive center fielder. They can improve a little with the bat. The other is Joe Adell, who's not played well in the major leagues, but was a really high top 10 level prospect. So if those two, if this is Joe Adell's Kyle Tucker 2020, this is his third year in the majors, and he finally figures out, and you go like, oh no, that's why he got drafted so high. That's why he was on the prospect list. Again, is that the likely scenario? Probably not. But it's again, there's some upside scenarios with the Angels, which I don't think there aren't for the Mariners.
I assume that he still is, but I honestly don't know. Is Justin Upton still under contract with the Angels?
Yes.
So that's my other part of the problem with the Angels is they're going to continue to give at-bats to Justin Upton instead of their prospects until he's hurt, because he's another guy who can't seem to stay healthy for an entire season.
Yeah, he's old and expensive.
Brian, there are 2 other teams in the AL West that I guess bear some conversation. I want to turn first to Oakland and mostly ask the most important question. Are the 3 of us going to get to go to Vegas soon to watch them play? Andy, do you have any insight, any guess? What do you think?
Oh, Vegas? That's a 2023 thing. And again, we have to finish 2022, but Oakland is completely, I think they've checked out. There are not enough. The politics in the city of San Francisco and the city of Oakland are such that there will never be public money for that stadium. Not unless there's a dramatic shift in how those citizens want to spend their money and their elected officials, empower that. Yeah. Having said that, Las Vegas is the closest, most logical, almost ready to go option. And I just don't see the A's in Oakland past this season. So it'll be a fantastic farewell season for them. Unfortunately, they're going to be fantastically rebuilding because, as of this moment, the Mats are still on the roster, Chapman and Olsen. Chris Bassett's still there, but I would almost think the first 3 transactions you're going to see when Major League Baseball opens things back up is those 3 guys being dealt elsewhere for prospects. And then the star of your team is who? Ramon Laureano, who still has 60-ish games left on his suspension. I got weirded out because he wasn't on their 40-man roster, and I had to go, what happened to him? Oh, yeah.
He cheated.
But yeah, the A's are not quite a dumpster fire because they certainly still have the ability to continue to compete even when everybody says they're not going to be able to. But if you're talking about losing their 3 best players on top of a year where they've lost other players, they also dealt away, or I guess lost Mark Canha to the Mets.
They lost their manager who, I think kept that thing together. And
I think Billy Beane has finally retired from the organization. So I don't know how much more there is to give. At some point, the law of averages is going to work out where all these moves don't work in their favor, and it's not going to be great. I actually think they're going to be worse than the Rangers this year, which is not a good place to be.
I'll disagree with Andy a little, mostly because I don't think they're trading all of their players. I think right now they're listening to deals on all of them. Certainly were before the break and will, but I only think they're going to trade 1 or 2. And most of what they would, the history of the A's when they make these trades is not that they go get, your first round draft pick from last year who's an A-ball, but they get major league ready guys who are in AAA or have small periods. So I don't think they're going to collapse to a 70-win team. I don't think they're, competing for the first pick in the draft next year. And I don't think they'll trade Matt Chapman because I think his value right now is low because he had a bad season. They may trade him at the trade deadline if it's not going well and he's able to get his bat back and his defense continues to be among the single handful of best players in the majors. But that being said, I don't see a lot of scenarios in which that team, I think they are going to trade Matt Olson from a from a financial standpoint. But I don't think they need to ship everyone out either from a financial standpoint. From
Okay,
a
then I
payroll
guess we
standpoint
have
or from a competitive standpoint.
yeah, we
But
have to discuss.
I thought everybody was going to the Yankees. Everybody goes to the Yankees.
Everybody goes to the Yankees.
That's what all my friends up here tell me. They also think that, they also think every major league player should play for the Yankees.
The Yankees could take advantage of that rare 50-man roster exemption.
If there is, a team that is destined to give their best prospects to New York, it is the Philadelphia / Kansas City / Oakland A's. There's a history there.
There is them in Boston, as we learned in Moneyball. So I guess we do. I want to move on to something fun, but before we do that, we have to discuss Arlington. Brian, what do you see out of our friends to the north?
I look forward to forgetting that the Silver Boot exists, which is always what happens when the Astros are good and the Rangers aren't. It's not that big a deal.
Yeah.
And secondly, the one thing I'll say sort of, I started by saying I watched the Rangers at the beginning of last year. It's like, who's going to be on a playoff team is they brought up at the end of the year, a couple of interesting pitching prospects, particularly in Glenn Otto, who's a guy out of Rice who they got from the Yankees in the Gallo trade. Another guy, AJ Alexi, who actually got from the Yu Darvish trade in 2017 from the Dodgers. And these could be somebody. But they're also pitching prospects who have thrown 20 some odd innings in the majors. So we'll certainly sort of see where they end up. But again, that speaks to it's a long-term prospect for the Rangers. They have a really good prospect in this guy, Josh Young, who went to Texas Tech and was a first-round pick a couple years ago. So you can see them having a good infield in the future, but it still seems a couple years away.
See, I killed the mic there for my sneeze. I was trying not to be disrespectful when we discuss Arlington. What about you, Andy? The Battle of I-45.
I think that, Corey Seager and Marcus Semien and John Gray are great pickups for any franchise. But the Rangers were a lot more than 3 players away. They're going to put a lot of marketing dollars into Adolis Garcia, who, rookie of the year. Who is
28, he's 28, turning 29. He's not that young.
Yeah, he's about to play his 29 season. He's going to fall back down to earth because you even saw this towards the end of the year. Pitchers are going to figure him out. He's got giant holes in his swing, and you don't have
to take a walk.
Yeah, you don't have to pitch to him if you don't want to. So I think they're also probably going to be dealing Kiner Falefa, who is rapidly climbing up my list as on the Astro killer roster. Just a guy that doesn't seem to do much against anybody else, but like Fernando Vina of old, just appears out of nowhere to kill Astros hopes all the time. But there's so many holes. I think they've got some good pieces, to Brian's point. But young pitchers are as good as their last start a lot of times. And they're 2 to 3 years away if you're positive about everything they're doing.
And how often does that work out in baseball? We have about 10 minutes left, and I want to talk about something that maybe will offend some people. And I'm not talking about Pope Francis's comments on cancel culture. How about that for a Catholic drop in today? But my favorite Astros uniform of all time. I know it's cliche, but I'm a big fan of the chest stripes, the tequila sunrise. I'm a big fan of the shooting star. I love the tequila shoulder boards. My least favorite is pretty commonly known is everything they wore when they first moved to Minute Maid. But I want your take on the Astros current uniform set, because it kind of bums me out that it's so dull and boring considering it is a team who part of our tradition is the fact that the uniforms are usually pretty cutting edge and they're usually pretty forward thinking.
So my initial thought when they moved to this uniform is how happy I was we got back to orange.
Yeah.
And, the Astros are, they're a team of we're what people in the 60s thought the 80s were going to be, right? This is, we're a team of the future and sort of this, futuristic, right? Tequila sunrise, orange. And you'd look at like people particularly wearing like pinstripe jerseys and go, with a Clemens or Pettit jersey and go like, wait, which team is that for? And why are we copying the staid Yankees? Why are we not innovative? Why are we not weird city of the future, a team of orange? So I initially remember my excitement when I saw like the new hat in the store up here. Like, yes, that's sort of who we are. That's worn on me a little bit over time as sort of okay, we have to be a little bit more than just orange, as much as orange is the tradition of the team. And of course, orange is in my Twitter handle, because that's, again, part of to me, part of I'm orange fire because, the Astros are breathing orange fire, right? In the Go Astros song. So yeah, I would like, particularly with alternate jerseys, more experimentation.
Andy?
My history or my where I tend to lean is when the Astros or the Houston franchise was introduced, we borrowed a name from a gun manufacturer without necessarily talking to the gun manufacturer, which is what necessitated the name change.
Yeah, and it had nothing to do with political correctness back then too. People were like, "Oh, look, they were getting sued." It was
having a revolver on the jersey with the smoke coming from the barrel making the words Colt 45 was cool. It was cool in 1962. It's still cool if you look at it now, no matter what you feel about guns. Moving to the Astros and having the shooting star jerseys, which are my personal favorite, even though I never really lived in that era.
Yeah.
Those to me are fantastic. And I wish there was more of an embracing of that or adoption of that. We were the franchise of the future and the Jetsons of Major League Baseball, because when we were imagined and what we became are kind of disparate. But it always bothered me that Drayton McClain decided to go with the red and brown and black motif and take us back to trains. And I think there was a very heavy push on his part to somehow change the name of the franchise in 2000 to the Engineers or something along those lines.
I've seen the Houston Diesel.
Yeah, just to really get back to this idea that we were a transportation hub or a train hub. Well, you know what? So were 5,000 other cities in the United States at that point in history. It's great that we went back to our traditional colors. It's time, and maybe this comes in the next season because it would have already had to happen for 2022. You'd already see leaks about it. And you already probably have an announcement about it. To have a refresh of the jersey. I don't want to abandon the navy and the orange.
I don't either.
I think that's the thing. But I think there are ways, and you can look on Twitter, there are people who have started to reimagine what this might look like. But to involve Nike, because that's who you're going to have to involve, to get back to things that are innovative and look cool and futuristic even, because that's who our franchise was supposed to be. So that's kind of where we are now. Will the orange jerseys, the plain orange jerseys, always have a place in my heart? Yes, that's what we were wearing when we won Game 7.
Still your 2017 World Series champion.
Still, and I like the road grays, but I think there's the whites are horrible. You might as well have bought those from Barcelona Sports, local Houston reference, on the discount rack, and there's so much room to do better.
I don't want to lose the H logo. I'm talking about update the word mark. It's bring, like you said, bring back some of the shooting star thing. I love the Navy ones with the rainbow up the sides. I mean, it's a classy touch and an homage.
Well, the only thing more generic than our word mark would be like if you opened up Word right now and went to the default Calibri. Or Times New Roman. That's our word mark. We got it right off of Word, so it must be
right off of Word. Well, hopefully we'll see something. Hopefully we'll be part of it. I'm curious to see what they'll do with the City Connect uniforms. I didn't hate all of them, and I'm curious to see what we get out of the Astros this year. We will be back next week for a fun episode. Brian, Andy, thanks for jumping on, and go Stros.
Go Stros.
Happy week and go Stros.